children.
Hello, Miss Garcia.
How are all of you today?
Good.
Now, what historical event do you all want to learn about today?
Let's learn about the court case Worcester versus Georgia. Yes, that's my favorite Supreme Court case.
All right, before we get into the details, let's talk about one of the previous cases concerning Native American lands.
In the 19th century, the Cherokee people occupied a large amount of land in Georgia. The Georgia government enacted laws that placed Cherokee lands under the control of the Georgia government, even though the Cherokee believed to be a sovereign self-governing nation. In 1831, the Cherokee objected and brought suit directly to the U.S. Supreme Court on grounds that they were an independent nation whose rights had been violated by the state of Georgia. The case is now known as Cherokee Nation versus Georgia, and Chief Justice John Marshall held that the court had no jurisdiction under the U.S. Constitution to deal with the issue because the Cherokees were a domestic dependent nation, not a truly sovereign nation.
So the Cherokee Nation versus Georgia case was a precedent to the Worcester versus Georgia case?
Correct, Haley. Now about the Worcester case.
Samuel A. Worcester was a white Christian missionary living amongst the Cherokee people on Cherokee lands. He was also known to be open about his opposition of the removal of American Indians from their own land. In 1830, the state of Georgia imposed a law that declared that any white settler living on Cherokee lands must obtain a permit from the Georgian government. Unfortunately for Worcester, he refused to obtain a permit from the state government and was arrested by Georgian authorities on March 12, 1831. Worcester's lawyers were able to release him because he was postmaster in New Echota and was therefore in the Cherokee Nation under the authority of the federal government. But Governor George R. Gilmer even went as far as to persuade the government to remove Worcester as postmaster in order to make him subject to arrest. Worcester and 6 other white settlers, including missionaries, spouses of American Indians, and teachers who were living on Cherokee lands without a state permit, were sentenced to 4 years of hard labor in the Georgia State Penitentiary.
Did the Georgian court have the authority to sentence Worcester and the others to jail like that?
Well, that's part of the controversy, Erica.
Worcester appealed to the Supreme Court and claimed that the Georgia law that he violated was unconstitutional and that it conflicted with the previous agreed-on U.S. Cherokee treaties such as the treaties of Hopewell and Halston. The law also violated contract and commerce clauses of the United States Constitution and the sovereign status of the Cherokee Nation.
So the Worcester case is really addressing the legislative power of the state versus the power of the federal government in relation to the rights of the American Indians?
Right on, Bina.
Worcester's claims were backed up with evidence very well. The Treaty of Hopewell, which was a treaty between the U.S. Congress and Cherokees signed in 1785, stated in Article 3 that said Indians, for themselves and their respective tribes and towns, do acknowledge all Cherokees to be under the protection of the United States of America and of no other sovereign whosoever. This supported Worcester's claim that there was a previous agreement between the United States Congress and the Cherokee not to a state of the U.S. Also in the Constitution of the United States, Article 1, Section 8, Clause 3, Congress has the power to regulate commerce with foreign nations and among the several states and with the Indian tribes. This also supports Worcester's claim that only the federal government had the ability to relate with the Indian nations, a power not granted to the states by the Constitution. Lastly, Worcester's claimed that several of the treaties between Congress and the Indians were ratified by the Senate, and they claimed that the Cherokee Nation was a sovereign nation authorized to govern themselves and all persons who have settled within their community, free from any right of legislative interference by the several states composing of the United States of America. And also remember that the Cherokee had set up a governing body of their own that all peoples living on Cherokee land subjugated to.
Sounds like Worcester had a pretty compelling case. So what did Chief Justice Marshall decide?
Well,
He ruled in favor of Samuel Worcester. Yes, Marshall said that the Cherokee and other Indian nations were distinct independent political communities retaining their original natural rights. He overturned Worcester's conviction and ordered his release from prison. Despite this ruling, the Georgian government did not comply, and Worcester was forced to finish his 4-year sentence.
That's really unfortunate for Worcester, but doesn't Marshall's ruling technically contradict his previous ruling in the Cherokee Nation versus Georgia case?
yes, Shaheen, it does. But the Cherokee continued to use this ruling in subsequent cases to defend their right as a sovereign nation.
Also, were the Cherokee even represented in the court case at all?
Unfortunately, no, the Cherokee Party was not represented in the suit, which could possibly be a reason why there was no discussion of the federal government enforcing the ruling that Indian nations were now considered sovereign.
So what were some other effects of the Worcester case ruling?
Well, one repercussion was that Andrew Jackson, the president at the time, was very unhappy with the ruling and refused to enforce the court's decision. Under the Indian Removal Act of 1830, the Cherokee were forced to leave Georgia beginning in 1838, and nearly a quarter of the 15,000 Cherokee were forced to relocate died on the Trail of Tears. It was supposed that Jackson even said, "John Marshall made his decision, now let him enforce it."
So what did you all find was the most important to take away from this case?
I found that states do not have the authority to impose laws on Native American land.
Good, Erica. What about you, Bina?
I think that the ruling that the Indian nations were sovereign bodies was really important because it set up a more clearly outlined relationship between the federal government and Indian nations, even though the ruling was often ignored in many decisions of federal government later on.
Great insight, Bina. Now, didn't you all have fun learning about Supreme Court cases?
You betcha!
Well, you just have to wait next time for History for Kids.
He's leaving on that midnight train to Georgia. On the midnight train. Yeah, said he's going back.